you learned about the rhythm section by working with those extraordinary players they were in New York, and then they were out here, the Wrecking Crew, that famous legendary group. And I remember when Neil Diamond first hired me, he was coming to LA to record for the first time. And his producer called me back a couple of days later and said, "Who should we call?"
Was that Tom Catalano?
Tom Catalano.
Yeah.
Now, up to that point, I had a lot of Jimmy Webb albums and, Mamas and Papas and stuff like that. And I remember looking on the back and seeing all these same names all the time. Hal Blaine, Joe Osborne, Larry Nichtel. Mm-hmm. So I said, okay, I'll call you back. And I did, and I gave him those names. And that's who he hired. Uh-huh. And then I said, the sound of these records is really good. This guy Armin Steiner, you should call him. He has his own studio. So that's what they did. And you know what? I learned those guys, that Wrecking Crew, what they would do, they would create out of thin air. And we would all sit in the studio together, and we would kind of create the rhythm section. Because in Neil's case, Neil often came to the studio with an unfinished song. It was very hard to make a track when you just had like maybe 6 bars. And you say, well, where's the rest of the song, Neil? I say, well, I'll have it in a minute, of course, 2 weeks later. But what would happen is that these players were so inventive. And you saw the things that they did. And Hal Blaine, I learned a lot of stuff about the drums from him. I did some experiments with Hal. I brought him to Warner Brothers. There was a couple of films that I worked on, and I had Hal sit in with the orchestra, and I said, I don't want rock or pop drums. I just want, like, explosions here and there, colors and everything. And he did that in a few places. This was before Hans Zimmer, by the way. And Hal did it live. He would sit there, and he would hit something, and then and I couldn't really write it out for him. I just would indicate kind of where it should happen, and he would make it up, and it was magical. It was amazing what he would do, and he would see the film, and I would set him so he could watch the film a little bit. So it's very hard to write down a rhythm section. You don't really write it down. You can write it down, but
and you probably don't want to with those guys.
Yeah. You would give them something. You would give them maybe the architecture or maybe this bass line. But they were so creative. They would invent stuff. Mm-hmm. There's a marvelous documentary out now called The Wrecking Crew, where they interview a lot of those people.
Produced by Tommy Tedesco's son,
right.
Tommy Tedesco being one of the Wrecking Crew,
right.
One of the greatest guitar players ever.
But the stuff that they did was amazing. Gradually a track would emerge. Mm-hmm. And then I would go home and write the orchestra on top of it.